Hey everyone, welcome to the Incubator podcast. I'm your co-host, Darren Boyd.
And this is Satbir Sran. Thank you for joining us and tuning in. We're really excited today to bring you the CEO and co-founder of Bedrock Security, Bruno Kurtic. Bruno, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
Bruno, again, absolute pleasure and delight. You are an amazing individual with a profound history. But before we launch off, I would like our listeners to really have a little bit of better understanding of who is Bruno and a little bit more about your background, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure, you're making me blush. So I'm Bruno Kurtic, as you said, co-founder and CEO of Bedrock Security. Also, one of the founders of Sumo Logic in 2010. That was a big part of my career and my journey. A lot of learnings happened through that journey. But generally, I am a software engineer by trade from, way back when. That's what I was educated in. That was where my passions were. I still write code. And at some point in time, maybe some early 2000s, I took a wrong turn somewhere. I ended up going into product and strategy and sort of exited the actual proper engineering. And I am where I am today. Part of my journey was also at a company called Web Methods in late 90s. Web Methods was a very interesting company where I learned how to build a business from very small to a large company. It was a company that went IPO in 2000 and invented the first XML server. So, I spent a lot of time in the enterprise software, almost always data infrastructure, backend, big B2B stuff. I don't know how to do anything else. And even during the times when enterprise software was kind of a dirty word here in the Valley, I was proud to be one of the enterprise software people. So I'm still doing that, and I will probably die doing that.
That is certainly amazing, Bruno. And well, maybe that's a great place to kind of double click into. So again, you've done this before. You've been on this path of building up firms, companies, and maybe we start up with your journey with Sumo Logic that really kind of maybe put you where you are today, or brought you to back at it with Bedrock. So it would be great if you can share with us how you built up Sumo Logic, what impact that had not only on the firm but in the marketplace. You IPO'd that, and in the first day, that stock went up. Your stock went up 22%. Amazing. So certainly a lot there to unpack, and I'm sure you're bringing that here right to Bedrock. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more of kind of how that's shaping your current position and direction.
Sure. We learn most on our failures, and then second most on our successes. And I would say that my journey at Sumo Logic had both of those, right? How I ended up at Sumo Logic is that I was in the SIM space, working in a company called SenSage, where I was actually competing with my co-founders of Sumo. And so we were both building a SIM technology, on-prem stack, classic, as you kind of would remember, early 2000s, mid 2000s. And we were all thinking separately and independently, hey, this needs to be disrupted. There's this cloud thing happening, Salesforce was doing SaaS, and we're like, okay, we're spending way too much time helping our customers run this stuff versus actually get value out of it. So for me, that was transformational because it was the early days of cloud, right? Not a whole lot of IT development or security professionals were actually adopting cloud technologies. DevOps teams were moving to the cloud. And for us, the core risk there was, is the market ready for a cloud native, cloud only log analytics SIM technology? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about that problem. We were actually partnered with the same investor that is an investor into Bedrock Security, Ashim Chandna here at Greylock Partners. He was the lead investor into Sumo Logic. And he was also thinking about, hey, how do we build a new technology to disrupt this market, a very stagnant market with lots of vendors in it, all the way from ArcSight to QRadar and whatnot. And we were looking to figure out, hey, what's the right approach to build a cloud-native log analytics SIM company. And so that was sort of the beginning of that journey. I came into that company as the head of product. I was sort of founding head of product and a founder. And my Christian Bidgan and Kumar Sarab were my co-founders who were the technologists of the company. Like they were the engineering team, CTO, VP of engineering, chief scientists type of folks who helped sort of build the technology from the ground up. So, let me pause there before I go on, but there's plenty more to talk about in terms of that journey.
So Bruno, there's probably a lot of similarities on what pulled you into the data security posture management space. There's some obvious areas that we're seeing challenges with. There's not just data proliferation, which is fairly understood or fairly accepted, but there's usage patterns. Some of those usage patterns have a security angle. Some of them have a monetary angle. There's now generative capabilities. There is this complexity in identity and role chaining to get to some of these data repositories. It is a wonderfully complex space. How did you view it coming into this? Why did you think now was the time to maybe solve or tackle on this very complex issue? What kind of drew you to this, I suppose?
That's a great question, and it's a very loaded question. Could probably have a whole half an hour just talking about that. So the reason why I decided to partner with Pranava and Ganesh on Bedrock Security is because of how I sort of saw the value of the technology we're building. And just like you said, you are very much right. There's a lot more there than just a DSPM application, right? I think of DSPM, data security posture management, as the first application of the technology we're building. And then, the applications of this technology beyond there are endless. And so let me talk a little bit about that. I think of this, so Bedrock Security is built on what we think is a novel concept of a metadata link. I think of that as the missing link between data producers and data consumers. What that means is, when you look at kind of like the full life cycle of data, like from creation to consumption, there's lots of bits that play a key role in how that data is analyzed, how it's visualized, how it's transformed, how it's generated. The missing link is how that data is managed and inventoried. There's been multiple attempts to sort of figure out how to solve that problem that have failed in the past. And right now, essentially, the way we think about this is, you cannot protect data that you cannot see. So if you can't find the data, if you don't know what is in the data, meaning you can't see what's in it, if it's sensitive, what topics, who owns it, where it came from, where it moved, you can't protect it. And if you can't protect it and you can't see it, you can't do anything else with it either. You can't manage it, you can't retire it, you can't delete it, you can't retain it, you can't reduce cost for it, you can't govern access to it, you can't figure out whether it can be useful to your business to be analyzed in an effective way, right? So there's lots of ways and reasons that this management inventory piece is missing, and that's what we're building, right? That's what I was excited about. I was excited about solving the enterprise-wide single source of truth for all data sets. And our first application of that is if we can find it, if we can classify it and understand entitlements to it, then we can first solve the proactive security measures for that data, right? And then beyond that, the world's your oyster.
There's a couple things to comment on there. That first piece is exceptionally difficult to be able to find the data in all the mediums, in all the formats, and to do it constantly. So one, you have to be fast, you have to be accurate, and there's so much data that we can't necessarily scan the whole thing. But Bedrock's done something really, really wonderful, incredibly accurate, incredibly fast. And the way you use semantic reasoning and exploring that data landscape means that your sampling techniques are efficient, and you're not relying on just regex. You're not relying on just dictionaries. You're doing something way more capable, and it's massively differentiated. We know we have a lot of the same customers, and we always hear the same things, that you are cost efficient, you're incredibly fast, you're incredibly accurate. That is difficult unto itself. And then you do a lot more with that. But can you focus on how did you even get that so right? Because there's a lot of, I'm not going to mention anybody, but there's a lot of players that only focus there. And I find that you've surpassed them by a dramatic amount, even in that space alone. Can you comment about how some of that came about?
Yeah. First and foremost, I believe that focus, we talked about the startup journey and Sumo Logic and Bedrock. Focus is, the key aspect of building a company from early days to a large company. One of the core reasons why we've been able to really innovate in this area is because of focus, right? We have taken on this specific problem, right? How do you scalably discover and classify all the data, right? Very broad, all data stores, all data types, structured, unstructured, and semi-structured, but stick with that problem first to make sure we get to real results. And it also, of course, involves, do you have the right talent? My co-founders, Pranava and Ganesh, bring forward incredible know-how from an esoteric space of data backups, right? Rubrik and Cohesity, the two of them competed for years, built incredibly scalable systems, had to think about what does it mean to do incremental backups? What does it mean to scan the entire environment? What does it mean to say, okay, this has changed, therefore we need to back up this delta? Like all of these quote unquote techniques from I would argue somewhat of a boring space were incredibly valuable in this very space that we're innovating on right now. And so what we've done is we've basically taken that know-how and married it with the sort of generative AI space that was emerging. And so the know-how plus the new technologies available to us that make it possible for us to not have to write a bunch of regular expressions and rules, to not have to fine-tune everything continuously, allowed us to actually build a system that, number one, both scales incredibly well, because of that architecture that we deploy that is entirely serverless in nature, doesn't deploy any infrastructure whatsoever, and is able to hyper-parallelize when it starts running, and marry that with that generative AI approach and these sort of super sophisticated techniques that don't just look at the data itself, but actually look at surrounding metadata, things like column names, existing labels, and all that, to actually make a multi-vector determination of what does this piece of data look like? What does it mean? Is it sensitive? Could there be a false positive if we just look at the content itself? Do we look at things around it and so on? So it's both a combination of the timing and the available technologies, but also the know-how of this team that we put together here, which I think is sort of an essential piece of the ingredients here at Bedrock.
That's again very comprehensive kind of overview. We're talking about of a difficult area of all things data oriented there, Bruno. Now you touched on Gen AI. We already know data proliferation and the complexity that exists all there. What does this mean from an organization perspective? Basically, our customers, right? So you have CXOs, security individuals, different personas, all trying to grapple it. How would you, from a Bedrock lens, summarize the best way that these individuals should approach a strategy around data security? Because DSPM, as you mentioned, is the starting point, and getting some of the classification, discovery, all of those are right, and then add Gen AI to it. So it's all kind of coming at them, and they're all trying to process this. How would you, or what would you recommend as a strategy for these leaders to think about, and how they might actually start solutioning or getting started on this path?
That's a really great question. And if you believe what I believe is that there is a missing link in data lifecycle, which is this data inventory and data classification and data discovery engine, which we believe we want to build. Then you have to think about sort of, if I'm the consumer of technology like this, if I have a problem like DSPM, like basically, hey, do I know where my data is? Do I know how sensitive it is? Do I know who has access to it? And can I improve my risk by essentially, proactively addressing some areas of exposure and access. So if that's the problem, right, the way that I would think about this, and this is kind of, we've learned from conversations with our customers, some of our smartest customers think like this already, like they can see the potential in a technology like this. So they're not evaluating technology like this from what are all the features you can deliver, right? Vertical features. Do you have every checkbox, every integration, every bell and whistle in a technology, which is the most common when you look at the the RFPs and RFIs, like do you do X and Y, and then you go through 150 questions and and then you summarize all of those. The way that the best ones out there are evaluating this is, can I start at the sort of bottom layer of Maslow's pyramid of needs, right? To get a little philosophical here. Okay, what is the bottom layer of the Maslow's pyramid of needs in the context of data security in the enterprise? Well, it might be, do you even know what you have? Like, if you don't know what you have, what are you going to do, right? You can be really, really tight on what you know that you have, but the stuff that you don't know is out there and exposed, and it's probably where you're going to get bit, right? So can you first build a visibility layer that is comprehensive, that is cost-effective, that is fast and scalable, that gives you the view of the forest for the trees, right? You can see what you have. Then the second is, okay, do I understand access? Do I understand who's entitled? Can I see who has access to this data so that I can understand, do I have exposure and things like that? And then, do I have the ability to potentially, build policies and detect, exposed data, or detect data movement, or detect data lineage? So that all builds, it's like a layer, like a pyramid, just like I said, Maslow's pyramid of needs, right? And so in my mind, the best customers of ours who are actually informing how we're building our platform are starting at that bottom. And this is what I was saying earlier, Darren, about focus, right? We focused on these layers because they're so foundational. They are, if you want, a bedrock of enterprise data security strategy, right? There's a reason why the name of the company is Bedrock, so that you can build the foundation of that pyramid on Bedrock, right? And so we are recommending that CXOs who are wondering about how to solve this problem think about broad value they're going to deliver to the enterprise in the long term by collecting all of this information and then solving that vertical problem like a DSPM in this case that is budgeted today, but evaluate the technologies based on what can you do for me now, and then what will you be able to do for me later, right? And it takes a fundamentally different approach to have a long-term vision and a strategy for a technology piece like this. And that's what what we're learning from our customers, and that's how we are orienting our own implementation of this platform to sort of have that long-term value.
Yeah, there's something that Pranava speaks about, and I love it, which is this concept of safe, and I think it's secure, accurate, fast, efficient, yep. Especially as it applies to that, like you said, that underlying substrate, that bedrock.
Yep.
There's I don't know if this is a question so much as a comment for the viewers. What I have seen with Bedrock, which I also find amazing from that bottom layer, is Bedrock will align to multiple compliance frameworks and it can surface results, but it can do something that I find is just immeasurably valuable beyond that, which is because of the way you look at proximity and you're evaluating your data space, you often come back with, by the way, here's some other data that may be valuable to you that you haven't necessarily identified either. In our customers, we've seen you surface so many other points of light that somebody might want to build a policy around, which is just fascinating, whether it's a sales quote, whether it's some SOW ID, whether it's intellectual property. There's so many other things that you kind of illuminate as you go through this in that bottom substrate. Yep. So that would be one comment there. The other one, and maybe this goes back to your point of focus that I'd love to get your take on, is there are some vendors that are trying to do everything, including DDR. They want to be a DLP solution. They want to do some sort of detection. They want to try and do it in real time, which is exceptionally difficult. if I have this right, this is what I interpret you're doing, which is, I think, way more powerful, which is focusing on a preventative stance. So going back to that identity and role chaining aspect, Bedrock has the ability to identify some critical data classification types and then build a policy around that that says this individual, through some myriad of role chaining, cannot access this data classification no matter where it lands. And I think that is such a fundamentally different approach, and it's so rooted in if you go back to Maslow, it's rooted in that core necessity that you're actually trying to achieve. Why bother trying to detect something that's occurring when I can just state a policy up front that says you shall not? I think that's a wonderful differentiator. Is there anything you'd want to expand on in any of those areas?
Yeah. Those are great points. Thanks for bringing them up. Let me start with the first point you made. You're right. We've actually, again, spent our time on these areas of the platform so that we can go really deep on them, right? So we can actually build a differentiated product in that area. And so one of the core aspects of Bedrock is that we fingerprint everything, and that's a very much like it's a generative AI technique. We actually use a variety of techniques that come from backup to make the fingerprinting and vector embeddings very, very efficient. And we use that then to surface data sets to understand similarity, to understand lineage, to essentially discover, hey, not just you told me that this data looks like this, and if you told me that this data looks like this and it's got this classification, we will then find all things that are similar by looking at the content of data sets, right? We have customers who are using us for very, very sophisticated tracking of intellectual property, for example. This is like, I would call this, the level 10 of DSPM. Like 99% of enterprises are nowhere near there. But, we have customers who are using us for tracking DNA sequences around their enterprise, right? To ensure that there's no IP violations and those DNA sequences don't get, copied, fragmented, modified, and then used in an inappropriate way. Like, it's really kind of sophisticated stuff. And so we've done that because we stayed really close to building this sophisticated classification engine, and it sort of evolved from, hey, can I detect PII? Sure. Can I understand topics? Can I understand business context? Can I understand what an intellectual property, what could be important, how it could be attached to which line of business, right? And so we start with that core and expand it from there rather than building 3 other solutions on top of it, right? And on the focus side and on the preventative and, DLP, DDR, real time, again, it's a lot of those things are important and they will be important. But the way I also oftentimes will talk about data security or security in general, I actually think that enterprise security only exists to protect our data, because data is the crown jewel in the enterprise, right? And so we haven't been able to put data at the center of enterprise security up until now. And we haven't been able to because data is fluid, it's amorphic, you can't put your arms around it, it changes all the time, it's growing exponentially, and developers are creating most of it, it's all machine generated data. So it's really hard to put your arms around data. And we've then, because of that, we've said, okay, we must protect that data by protecting things around data, networks, identities, perimeters and whatnot. And so instead of putting security on data, we're trying to shut the doors on things that allow people to access data. And so right now, our approach here is we are going to put the data at the center of enterprise security. So by building these bottom layers of this platform, understanding deeply what you have, who has access to it, we can deliver this information to every security process in the enterprise. You want to enrich your SIM alerts with which SIM alerts are related to sensitive data sets? Well, there's an API for that. Run your SOAR into Bedrock and prioritize your alerts that way. You want to enrich your effectiveness of your vulnerability patching program in CNAPP? guess what? Maybe out of the 10,000 vulnerabilities you have in your CNAPP, you might want to know which ones are related to sensitive data. Well, there's an API for that too. You want to improve the effectiveness of your DLP, who is struggling to classify data using regular expressions and rigid rules. Well, there's an API for that. You want to go ask Bedrock what's actually sensitive, what actually is intellectual property. That's what we're building, right? That's the sort of the core of why we think the value here is, going to be incremental and snowballing later on for our customers. And yes, eventually, maybe we will do DDR, maybe we will do, DLP and other things. But right now, we're building the foundation for all of those tools. And if our customers bring their own tools forward and they want to integrate, hallelujah, we love it.
Yeah, yeah. There's, if I may, the follow-on to that one, which I think is happening as well, that we see that you are so well positioned for, is going back to acceptable use of data. We almost saw this resurgence of this SaaS explosion, and now there's a lot of data contracts that are happening between these. But let's agree on when we're updating these, what formats we're going to exchange, where you're going to put it, how you get to use it, and some of that is coming back to a monetary consequence. And what we're finding is Bedrock is able to, again, understand the usage of that data, where it resides, who's accessing it, is the right people accessing it. There is so much you can do with that there's almost an ROI inherent just in that alone to keep the appropriate contracts in place and the appropriate licensing and therefore monetary component. So like anything around data, whether it's security, whether it's the monetization of, Bedrock is well positioned to understand all of that and safeguard it. So I think that's pretty important as well.
Yeah, it's, look, it's all about data management. Once you know what you have, where it is, who's accessing it, you can ask all kinds of questions like, are my vendors updating my data, right? They're under contractual obligations to update it on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly basis, whatever it is. We can tell that because it's in the metadata lake, right? Did we buy too many licenses for these types of data sets? And should we harvest some of them back and reduce our cost? Sure. We can tell you that. Are people, accessing and moving data around, copying it into places where they shouldn't be? Absolutely, we can tell you that, right? So that's the whole thing. Like, that's why I was saying the CXOs should think about, there is this problem they're trying to solve right now, but what are other problems that they will be able to address with a technology stack like this?
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing, Bruno. I think you all are on an amazing journey. And if I may, it's almost like the tip of the iceberg with data in of itself. But as you said, laying down that foundation on Bedrock is quite necessary, or getting that part is critical to any organization's strategy when it comes to data protection, data management, ultimately protecting that security and posture for the organization. So thank you for enlightening us and joining us today with your journey from the past as well as to the present. And any parting thoughts in terms of where Bedrock is heading next as you take this? I mean, we've covered all the aspects of the product, but from a business vantage point, any additional thoughts there, Bruno?
A few, maybe. A lot of the conversations we're having right now are actually interesting and unexpected to some degree from the perspective of like what this technology could be applied to. And we talked about some of those just a minute ago. But we're spending a lot of time with safe AI initiative owners in large enterprises, right? A vast majority of generative AI, Copilot, agentic AI projects don't go to production. And we learned that is because a lot of these projects have been built such that the enterprise doesn't actually know what data is being consumed by those generative AI engines, backends, LLMs, whatnot. And it's really been surprising to us of how often that is part of the conversation, how often CISOs and data governance people get involved in that, data privacy people get involved in that, because they're the ones who usually stop those projects from going to production. So much so that we ended up building a capability called Data Bill of Materials that allows us to actually give them a deep inspection of training data or documents for retrieval augmented generation scope to tell them and show them exactly what's in those data sets so that they can actually more safely build out those initiatives and actually launch into production. And so it's really interesting how this is evolving, right? You can think about, there's a whole sector evolving out there that venture capital is investing in called, AI security. And we're thinking it's really not AI security. We're thinking this is still just data security. Like you get a handle of your data and everything around it is secure. Put security, in your data, or put data at the center of your security strategy. You get a lot better outcomes, right? So that's an interesting aspect, and we're building all kinds of interesting things that help sort of work this through, like our trust boundaries and so on and so forth. But we are really excited about where this is going, right? And we are working with our customers. That's the sort of the source of all of our inspiration. Like every single customer we add teaches us something new. We have a customer who's using our APIs in line with their Slack. So somebody attaches a file to a Slack, they call an API into our metadata lake to determine how sensitive is this file, and chatbot immediately tells that user what they found and whether they should, send us out. It's really amazing. Like we had never thought about these use cases, but it's coming up. And it's, again, because once you know what you have and you have that at your fingertips in a graph store like ours, then you can do amazing things. So we're super excited. And probably like if I talk to you a couple months from now, I'd have a bunch of other examples that we haven't even talked about today and we haven't learned yet. So, thank you for inviting me here. This is a great podcast. It's really a pleasure to be here. And, let's do this again someday.
We're going to have to. So thank you to you, your vision, your focus, your team. Been a real pleasure to work with you and speak with you today. So again, thank you, Bruno.
Thank you, Bruno.
Thank you. And you're welcome.